The burgundy liquid dripped from Simone Carter's designer blazer onto the pristine marble floor of the Whitmore Foundation's annual gala. 200 of the most powerful people in corporate America watched in stunned silence as Helena Whitmore stood over her, empty wine glass still clutched in her manicured hand. "Oops," Helena said with a cruel smile that never reached her ice-blue eyes. "How clumsy of me." Simone's breath caught in her throat. The $2.5 billion contract she'd worked 18 months to secure, the deal that would transform her tech company from successful to legendary, hung in the balance. Every eye in the room bore into her, waiting to see how the only black woman CEO in attendance would respond to this public degradation. The wine continued its relentless journey down her jacket, each drop feeling like a nail in the coffin of her dreams. Helena's brother David, the billionaire who held Simone's future in his hands, stood frozen beside the chocolate fountain, his face unreadable. "I'm so sorry," Simone whispered, her voice barely audible above the classical quartet that had stopped playing. She grabbed a napkin from the nearest table with trembling hands, her movements mechanical as shock numbed her senses. "Don't apologize to her," a familiar voice cut through the silence. Grace Thompson, Simone's mentor and the woman who'd guided her through every major business decision for the past decade, appeared at her side with a towel. "You have nothing to apologize for." But the damage was already done. Whispers rippled through the crowd like wildfire. Camera phones emerged despite the gala's strict no photography policy. Simone could already see tomorrow's headlines forming in her mind: Tech CEO humiliated at charity gala, or worse, Black woman can't handle high society. Helena's laughter tinkled like broken glass. "Really, it was an accident. Though I suppose some people just don't belong at events like this." Her eyes swept dismissively over Simone's now stained outfit. "Perhaps next time you should stick to more appropriate venues." The coded language hit harder than the wine. Simone had heard it all her life, wrapped in pretty packaging but designed to cut deep. The message was clear: you don't belong here among us in our world. David finally moved, his 6-foot frame cutting through the crowd. "Helena, that's enough." "Oh please, David. I was just..." "Enough." His voice carried the authority of a man worth $12 billion. He turned to Simone, his expression unreadable. "Miss Carter, I apologize for my sister's clumsiness." Simone straightened her spine, drawing on every lesson her grandmother had taught her about dignity in the face of adversity. "Thank you, Mr. Whitmore. If you'll excuse me, I should clean up." As she walked toward the restroom, her heels clicking against the marble with forced confidence, she could feel the weight of every stare. This was supposed to be her night of triumph. The contract signing was scheduled for Monday morning, 3 days away from the deal that would change everything. Now she wasn't sure if she'd make it to Monday without losing everything she'd built. In the bathroom's harsh fluorescent light, Simone stared at her reflection. The woman looking back at her had wine stains on her jacket and tears threatening to spill from her dark eyes. But beneath the humiliation, something else flickered, a flame that Helena Whitmore had no idea she'd just ignited. Grace appeared in the doorway. "Sweetheart, we're leaving. Now. The contract. We'll be there on Monday. But your dignity is worth more than any deal." Grace's voice was firm but gentle. And Helena Whitmore just made the biggest mistake of her privileged life. As they walked out together, Simone's phone buzzed with a text from Malik, her CFO and closest friend. "Saw the video online. That witch has no idea who she's messing with. We've got work to do." Outside in the cool night air, Simone finally let herself feel the full weight of what had happened. The humiliation, the public degradation, the casual cruelty of it all. But as she stood there with Grace's supportive hand on her shoulder, something shifted inside her. Helena Whitmore thought she'd just put Simone in her place. Instead, she'd just given her the motivation to change the entire game. Malik Jenkins had coffee ready and a battle plan half-formed by the time Simone arrived at Carter Tech's downtown offices at 7 a.m. Sunday morning. The building hummed with unusual weekend energy as her core team assembled in the conference room they dubbed the War Room during their startup days. "First things first," Malik said, sliding a tablet across the polished table. "The video has 3 million views and counting. #Winegate is trending." Simone's stomach clenched as she watched the footage. Helena's cruel smile. Her own shocked face. The wine cascading down her jacket like a waterfall of humiliation. But in the comments, something unexpected was happening. "Look at these," Grace said, pointing to the screen. 90% are supportive. People are outraged on your behalf. Black women in business is calling for a boycott of all Whitmore enterprises," added Rebecca Chin, their corporate attorney who'd driven in from her Connecticut home. This isn't playing the way Helena thought it would. Thomas Reed, the one board member Simone trusted completely, cleared his throat. The question is, how do we use this moment? Do we take the high road, sign the contract Monday and move forward? Or do we make a statement? Simone studied the faces around the table. Her chosen family, the people who'd believed in her vision when she was just another black woman with big dreams and bigger obstacles. They'd built something extraordinary together, growing from a 3-person operation in a cramped WeWork space to a company worth hundreds of millions. What kind of statement? She asked quietly. Malik grinned, the expression she remembered from their MIT days when he was about to propose something audacious. We walk away. From all of it. The contract, the partnership, everything. Then we announce exactly why. That's $2.5 billion we're talking about, Thomas said carefully. Money that would fund your expansion into artificial intelligence, establish the scholarship program for underserved kids, secure your employees' futures for the next decade. I know what we'd be giving up, Simone said. But what would we be giving up if we stay? Rebecca leaned forward. From a legal standpoint, we have grounds for a discrimination claim. Helena's comments about appropriate venues and people like you could be construed as racially motivated. I don't want to sue them, Simone said firmly. I want to beat them. Grace, who'd been unusually quiet, finally spoke. Sweetheart, I've been in this business for 35 years. I've seen talented people destroyed by standing up, and I've seen equally talented people destroyed by staying silent. But I've never seen anyone in your position, with your resources, your reputation, your platform, have this kind of opportunity to change the conversation. What do you mean? You have choices Helena Whitmore never thought you'd have. You can walk away from their money because you've already built something that doesn't depend on their validation. How many people who look like you have ever been in that position? The room fell silent except for the hum of the city waking up outside their windows. Simone thought about her grandmother, who'd cleaned offices in buildings like this one, never imagining her granddaughter would one day own the top 3 floors. She thought about the young black girls who'd watched the video, seeing themselves in her humiliation. If we do this, she said slowly, we do it right. Professional, strategic, devastating. We don't just walk away, we make sure everyone understands exactly why we're walking away and what it costs them. Malik's grin widened. I was hoping you'd say that. Because I've been running some numbers and the Whitmore Group needs us a lot more than we need them. He pulled up a presentation on the smart screen. Their tech infrastructure is 15 years behind industry standard. Their cybersecurity is a joke. I could probably hack their mainframe with a smartphone and some basic social engineering. They're hemorrhaging talent because word is out that they're a toxic workplace for anyone who isn't white and male. And, Rebecca added, our contract includes a 60-day termination clause with no penalties. We could invoke it tomorrow and be legally clear. But we don't terminate tomorrow, Grace said thoughtfully. We make them terminate us. Simone looked around the room at these brilliant, loyal people who'd chosen to tie their futures to her vision. Are we really doing this? Are we really about to walk away from the biggest payday in company history to make a point about dignity? No, Thomas said quietly. We're about to walk away from their money to make a point about our worth. There's a difference. As Sunday afternoon faded into evening, they had a plan. Not just for Monday morning but for the complete restructuring of Carter Tech's future. One that didn't require the validation or partnership of anyone who saw Helena Whitmore's behavior as acceptable. By midnight, Simone sat alone in her office, looking out at the city lights. Tomorrow she would either make the biggest mistake of her business career or strike a blow for every person who'd ever been made to feel like they didn't belong in spaces they'd earned the right to occupy. Either way, Helena Whitmore was about to learn that some people don't just survive humiliation, they transform it into power. Monday morning arrived crisp and clear, the kind of October day that made Manhattan look like a movie set. Simone stood in front of her bedroom mirror, adjusting the collar of her navy blue power suit, the same designer who'd made the wine-stained jacket, but this one carried different energy. Today she wasn't dressing to impress the Whitmores. She was dressing for war. Her phone buzzed with messages of support. College friends, former colleagues, competitors who respected her work. Even her ex-husband Marcus had sent a text, "Go show them who you really are." The Whitmore Group's headquarters occupied a full city block in Midtown, its glass and steel facade reflecting the morning sun like armor. Simone arrived with Malik and Rebecca exactly on time, their faces composed, masks hiding the strategy beneath. David Whitmore's assistant, a nervous young man named Peter, led them to the executive conference room. "Mr. Whitmore will be right with you. Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water?" We're fine, thank you, Simone said, settling into the chair at the head of the table, a power move that wasn't lost on Peter, who blinked in surprise before scurrying away. The contracts were already laid out, pristine documents that represented months of negotiations. Simone traced her finger along the signature line she was supposed to sign, thinking about all the late nights, all the compromise, all the small indignities she'd swallowed to get to this moment. David entered exactly at 9, flanked by his legal team and his chief operating officer. Helena was notably absent, but her presence lingered like expensive perfume that had turned sour. "Miss Carter," David said, extending his hand, "I want to apologize again for Saturday evening. Helena's behavior was completely inappropriate." Simone shook his hand, noting how he avoided eye contact. "Thank you. I appreciate that." They settled around the table, lawyers arranging documents with practiced efficiency. The ritual of deal-making commenced. Small talk about market conditions, pleasantries about the weather, careful navigation around the elephant in the room. "Before we proceed," David said, pulling out his Mont Blanc pen, "I want you to know that Helena will be taking a step back from our foundation activities. What happened Saturday won't happen again." "Of course it won't," Simone said quietly. "Because after today there won't be any more opportunities." The room went still. David's pen hovered over the signature line. "I'm sorry?" Simone opened her own portfolio and withdrew a single sheet of paper. "Mr. Whitmore, I'm invoking the 60-day termination clause in our preliminary agreement. Carter Tech Solutions is withdrawing from this partnership, effective immediately." The silence stretched like a held breath. David's face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and something that might have been panic. "Miss Carter, surely we can discuss." "There's nothing to discuss." Simone's voice remained calm, professional. "Your sister's behavior on Saturday was merely the visible symptom of a deeper cultural problem. I've spent 18 months trying to convince myself that I could work with an organization that tolerates that kind of toxicity. I can't." David's COO, a man named Harrison who'd barely acknowledged Simone's presence in previous meetings, leaned forward. "You're making a mistake. This deal represents $2.5 billion. "Yes, I'm aware." Simone stood, Malik and Rebecca following her lead. "What you seem unaware of is what this partnership represents for you." She placed a folder on the table. "My team has prepared a comprehensive analysis of your technological infrastructure, cybersecurity vulnerabilities, and talent retention issues. Without our expertise, you're looking at a minimum 18-month delay in your planned digital transformation. Your competitors aren't waiting." David opened the folder, his face growing paler with each page. Malik had been thorough. Every weakness, every outdated system, every security gap laid out in devastating detail. "This is confidential information," Harrison sputtered. "All obtained through publicly available sources and basic industry analysis," Rebecca said smoothly. "Nothing proprietary, nothing illegal. Just competent research." "Miss Carter," David said, his composure finally cracking. "I understand you're upset about Helena's behavior, but walking away from this deal hurts you more than it hurts us." Simone paused at the door, looking back at the room full of powerful men who'd never imagined she'd have the strength to leave. "Mr. Whitmore, your sister poured wine on me because she wanted to remind me of my place. But she made a crucial error in judgment." Simone's smile was sharp as winter sunlight. "She assumed I needed your approval more than you need my expertise." "You're terminating a multi-billion-dollar contract over spilled wine?" Harrison asked incredulously. "I'm terminating a multi-billion-dollar contract over a pattern of disrespect that your organization has normalized. The wine was just the moment I stopped pretending it was acceptable." As they walked toward the elevator, David's voice followed them down the hall. "Miss Carter, please. Let's discuss this reasonably. Helena made a mistake, but—" The elevator doors closed on his pleading voice. In the mirrored walls, Simone saw herself clearly for the first time in months. Not the woman trying to fit into spaces that were never designed for her, but the woman who'd built her own space from nothing. "Phase 1 complete," Malik said quietly. "Now comes the hard part," Rebecca added. Simone nodded. Walking away was easy. Proving they'd made the right choice, that would take everything they had. But as they stepped out onto the bustling Manhattan street, Simone felt something she hadn't experienced in months. The absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. The story broke at 2:47 p.m. Eastern Time. Simone was in her office, fielding calls from board members and investors, when Grace burst through the door with her tablet. "You need to see this. Now." The headline on TechCrunch read, Carter Tech CEO walks away from $2.5 billion deal following racial incident. Below it, a photo of Simone leaving the Whitmore building that morning, her expression resolute, flanked by Malik and Rebecca. How did they? Simone began. Someone at Whitmore leaked it, Grace said grimly. And they're not controlling the narrative the way they hoped. The article was thorough and damning. An anonymous source, likely someone from David's legal team, had provided details about the contract termination, the technical analysis Simone had left behind, and most devastatingly, confirmation that the termination was directly linked to Helena's behavior at the gala. But the real earthquake came in the comments and social media response. #StandWithSimone was trending. The video of Saturday night's humiliation had spawned 1,000 reaction videos, think pieces, and corporate diversity discussions. Forbes wants an exclusive interview, Malik announced, appearing in the doorway with his phone pressed to his ear. So do CNN, CNBC, and Bloomberg. Oh, and Oprah's people called. Simone's phone rang. Thomas Reed's name appeared on the screen. Simone, I'm watching the coverage. The board is meeting in emergency session tonight. Some members are concerned about the financial implications. Which members? She asked, though she already knew. Jenkins and Morrison are asking questions about fiduciary responsibility. They're wondering if you let personal feelings override business judgment. Jenkins and Morrison, two older white men who joined the board when Carter Tech went public, bringing traditional corporate experience and constant second-guessing of Simone's leadership style. Tell them I'll address the board at tonight's meeting. In person. After Thomas hung up, the room fell quiet except for the constant ping of notifications on their phones. The story was spreading faster than they'd anticipated, growing beyond tech industry news into a broader conversation about corporate culture and racial dynamics in business. Rebecca looked up from her laptop. Whitmore stock is down 4% since the story broke. Their PR team just released a statement calling your decision impulsive and detrimental to both organizations. Of course they did, Grace said dryly. Blame the black woman for being emotional and irrational. It's the oldest play in the book. What's our response? Malik asked. Simone stared out her office window at the city skyline, thinking about all the young professionals of color working in those glass towers, swallowing daily indignities to keep their jobs, advance their careers, maintain their professional reputations. We don't respond to their statement, she said finally. We let our work speak for itself. What work? Rebecca asked. We just walked away from our biggest contract. Simone turned back to her team, the people who'd believed in her vision even when she'd started to doubt it herself. Remember the Patterson Group proposal we shelved last year because we didn't have the bandwidth? Understanding dawned on Malik's face. The Smart City Infrastructure Project. Boston, Detroit, and Atlanta. Combined value, $3.8 billion over 5 years. Socially conscious leadership, diverse executive teams, and they've been waiting for the right technology partner. Simone's smile was sharp and determined. I think it's time to dust off that proposal. Grace laughed, the first genuine laugh anyone had heard in days. You magnificent woman. You're not just walking away from Whitmore. You're walking toward something bigger. The emergency board meeting convened at 8 p.m. in Carter Tech's conference room. Jenkins and Morrison sat across from Simone like prosecutors preparing for trial, their faces stern with practiced disapproval. Simone, Jenkins began without preamble, the board needs to understand your decision-making process regarding the Whitmore contract. Of course, she replied calmly. I terminated a partnership with an organization whose values are fundamentally incompatible with ours. Values don't pay salaries, Morrison interjected. That contract represented security for our employees, funding for your expansion plans, validation in the marketplace. You threw it away over a glass of spilled wine. The room temperature seemed to drop several degrees. Thomas shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Grace's eyes flashed with anger, but she remained silent. Is that what you think happened? Simone asked quietly. I threw away a business deal over spilled wine? What else would you call it? Morrison pressed. Simone stood and walked to the whiteboard, picking up a marker. Let me explain what actually happened. She drew a timeline across the board. 18 months ago we began negotiations with Whitmore. During that time, I personally observed or experienced 17 instances of what could charitably be called cultural insensitivity from their team. She marked each incident on the timeline. Comments about my aggressive negotiation style. Questions about whether I was really the decision maker or just the face of the company. Assumptions that Malik was my boss despite clear introductions. And Saturday night's incident was simply the most public manifestation of a pattern I'd been documenting all along. Jenkins frowned. You never mentioned any concerns during our quarterly reviews. Because I was trying to make the deal work despite the environment. I was prioritizing the company's financial interests over my own dignity and, frankly, over our stated values as an organization. Simone set down the marker. That was my mistake. She returned to her seat, meeting each board member's eyes in turn. But here's what you need to understand. I didn't just walk away from Whitmore. I walked toward something better. Something that aligns with who we are as a company and what we want to build. She slid folders across the table. The Patterson Group has formally invited us to submit a proposal for their Tri-City Smart Infrastructure Initiative. Combined contract value, $3.8 billion over 5 years. They reached out this afternoon, specifically citing our principled leadership and commitment to inclusive business practices. The room went silent as board members absorbed the information. Morrison opened his folder first, his expression shifting from skepticism to surprise to something approaching respect. This is substantial, he admitted. It's more than substantial, Thomas said, reviewing the numbers. It's transformative. And it positions us as leaders in sustainable urban development, not just tech contractors. Jenkins looked up from the proposal. When did you have time to prepare this? We've been developing the relationship with Patterson for 2 years, Simone explained. But we couldn't pursue it while committed to Whitmore exclusivity clauses. Saturday night's incident didn't just free us from a toxic partnership. It opened the door to a better one. The board voted unanimously to pursue the Patterson opportunity. As the meeting adjourned, Morrison approached Simone privately. I owe you an apology. I questioned your judgment without understanding the full picture. You asked the questions you needed to ask, Simone replied. That's why you're here. But as she gathered her materials, she thought about all the people who would never see the full picture, who would always believe she'd thrown away a fortune over spilled wine. Let them believe it, she decided. The truth was more complex and more powerful than they could imagine. Sometimes walking away from what looked like everything was actually the first step toward having it all. The Patterson Group's offices occupied a converted warehouse in Boston's Innovation District, its exposed brick walls and soaring windows creating an atmosphere that was equal parts startup energy and established success. As Simone walked through the space with CEO Amanda Patterson, she felt something she'd rarely experienced in corporate settings: immediate cultural alignment. We've been following your work for years, Amanda said, guiding them past teams of diverse engineers and designers collaborating around standing desks and comfortable couches. But Monday's decision to walk away from Whitmore, that told us everything we needed to know about your character. Amanda Patterson was a 60-year-old white woman who'd built her company from a small environmental consulting firm into a major player in sustainable urban development. Her silver hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and her handshake had the firm confidence of someone who'd spent decades proving herself in male-dominated rooms. Character matters in partnerships, she continued, especially when you're building infrastructure that will serve communities for generations. The presentation room was filled with Patterson Group executives, city planning officials from Boston, Detroit, and Atlanta, and community representatives from each target area. Simone had insisted on community voices being part of the selection process, a requirement that had immediately distinguished Carter Tech from other bidders. Ms. Carter, said Detroit City Planner Robert Johnson, a black man in his 50s whose direct gaze reminded Simone of her grandfather. We've seen a lot of tech companies come through here with promises about smart cities and digital transformation. What makes you different? It was the question she'd been preparing for her entire career. Mr. Johnson, most tech companies approach urban development like they're installing software in a computer. They assume the hardware is passive and will simply adapt to their innovations. We approach it like we're joining a conversation that's been going on for generations. She clicked to the first slide of their presentation. Every smart city initiative we design begins with 6 months of community engagement. We don't just survey residents, we hire them. We train them. We create pathways for local talent to build and maintain the systems that will serve their neighborhoods. The room's energy shifted as she spoke, skeptical expressions giving way to engaged attention. This wasn't the typical tech pitch about efficiency and optimization. This was about equity and empowerment. For example, Malik added, taking over the technical portion, our traffic management systems don't just reduce congestion. They prioritize pedestrian and cyclist safety in low-income neighborhoods that have historically been treated as throughways for suburban commuters. And our economic development modules, Rebecca continued, are designed to support local small businesses, not just attract major retailers who'll compete with established community enterprises. Atlanta Community Representative Denise Williams leaned forward. That sounds wonderful in theory, but how do we know you'll follow through once you have the contract? We've heard promises before. Simone had been waiting for this moment. Because your communities will own equity stakes in the local implementations. Not symbolic partnerships, actual ownership percentages that give you voting rights and profit sharing. The room went completely silent. Amanda Patterson's eyebrows shot up. Even Malik looked surprised. This was a detail Simone had added to their proposal that morning without consulting the team. Ms. Carter, Boston's representative said slowly, are you saying you're willing to give up portions of your contract value to create community ownership? I'm saying we're willing to create sustainable relationships instead of extractive ones. The technology we install will only be successful if the communities using it have genuine investment in its success. Equity ownership ensures that investment. Robert Johnson sat back in his chair, studying Simone with new intensity. How much equity are we talking about? 15% of local operations in each city, with graduated buyout options if communities want to assume full ownership after the initial implementation period. The silence stretched longer this time. Amanda Patterson was rapidly calculating numbers on her tablet. City officials exchanged meaningful glances. Finally, Boston's lead planner spoke up. Ms. Carter, in 30 years of municipal contracting, I've never heard a major technology company make that kind of offer. Then you've been working with the wrong technology companies, Simone replied simply. The meeting continued for another 2 hours, diving deep into technical specifications, implementation timelines, and community engagement protocols. But the tone had fundamentally shifted. Instead of selling to skeptical buyers, they were collaborating with engaged partners. As they prepared to leave, Amanda Patterson walked Simone to the elevator privately. That equity offer wasn't in your preliminary proposal, she said. No, it wasn't. It's going to cost you tens of millions in potential profit. It's going to make us hundreds of millions in sustainable revenue and immeasurable amounts in social impact, Simone countered. Plus, it's the right thing to do. Amanda smiled, the first completely unguarded expression Simone had seen from her. You know, when I started Patterson Group 25 years ago, I thought I had to choose between doing well and doing good. You've just shown me that was a false choice. On the train back to New York, Malik couldn't contain his excitement. Did you see their faces when you mentioned community ownership? I thought Robert Johnson was going to cry. I thought you were going to cry, Rebecca laughed. Where did that idea come from? Simone stared out the window at the New England countryside rushing past. From watching my grandmother work 3 jobs to pay rent in a neighborhood that was slowly being improved for everyone except the people who already lived there. From realizing that most economic development is really economic displacement with better marketing. Her phone buzzed with a text from Grace. Whitmore Group just announced they're restructuring their technology initiatives and laying off 200 employees. Stock down 12%. Karma is a beautiful thing. Another message, this one from an unknown number. Ms. Carter, this is David Whitmore. I'd like to schedule a meeting to discuss potential collaboration opportunities. Perhaps we can find a way forward that works for both organizations. Simone showed the message to Malik, who snorted with laughter. That didn't take long. What are you going to tell him? Rebecca asked. Simone deleted the message without responding. Nothing. We're too busy building the future to waste time on the past. As Manhattan's skyline came into view, she thought about Helena Whitmore, probably sitting in some exclusive restaurant right now, completely unaware that her petty cruelty had set in motion a chain of events that would transform how 3 major cities approached urban development. Some people saw opportunity in humiliation. Others saw responsibility. Simone had learned to see both. 3 weeks after the Patterson Group presentation, Simone stood in Carter Tech's main conference room watching her team track real-time social media metrics on the smart screen. The numbers were staggering. Their LinkedIn followers had tripled, job applications were up 400%, and they'd received unsolicited partnership inquiries from 47 companies across 12 industries. This is unprecedented, said Dr. Sarah Kim, their new head of communications. A brilliant Korean-American woman they'd poached from a major PR firm who specialized in purpose-driven business messaging. I've never seen this kind of organic engagement around a B2B story. The story had evolved far beyond tech industry news. Business schools were teaching case studies about Simone's decision. The Harvard Business Review had commissioned a feature article. Young professionals of color were sharing their own stories of workplace discrimination using #MoreThanSpilledWine. But the real validation came in an unexpected form. Patterson Group had not only selected Carter Tech for the Tri-City contract but had also invited them to lead a consortium of minority-owned businesses in the implementation. The final contract value, $4.2 billion over 6 years. We're getting calls from mayor's offices, Malik reported. Seattle wants to discuss affordable housing integration with smart city infrastructure. Phoenix is interested in our water management technology. And get this. The mayor of Los Angeles wants to meet about applying our community equity model to their transportation initiatives. Grace looked up from the stack of partnership proposals she was reviewing. Sweetheart, I hope you're ready for what's coming. You're not just running a tech company anymore. You're leading a movement. The movement had found its voice in unexpected places. Corporate diversity officers were citing Simone's example in presentations about the business case for inclusive leadership. Investment firms were developing new metrics for evaluating company culture alongside financial performance. And most surprisingly, other CEOs were starting to ask harder questions about the true cost of toxic partnerships. There's something else, Dr. Kim said carefully. Helena Whitmore has been reaching out to journalists. She's planning some kind of response to the negative coverage. Simone had been expecting this. Helena's type never accepted consequences gracefully, they always tried to flip the script, to become the victim of their own actions. What's she saying? According to my contacts, she's positioning herself as the real victim. Claims you've destroyed her reputation over an innocent accident, that you're part of a cancel culture mob targeting successful white women. She's got meetings lined up with 3 major media outlets. The room fell silent. This was the counterattack they'd all been dreading, the moment when Helena would try to weaponize white femininity against black success, painting herself as the wronged party in a story of her own making. How do we respond? Rebecca asked. We don't, Simone said firmly. We let her tell her story. Truth has a way of speaking louder than spin. Thomas Reed, who'd been quietly reviewing financial projections, looked up with concern. Simone, she could do real damage to your reputation. To the company's reputation. Maybe we should be more proactive. Thomas, I appreciate your concern. But engaging with Helena's narrative gives it legitimacy it doesn't deserve. Our response is our work. Our response is the Patterson contract, the community partnerships, the jobs we're creating, the cities we're improving. Her phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, but something about the timing made her answer. Miss Carter? This is Jennifer Walsh from 60 Minutes. I'm calling about a story we're developing on workplace discrimination in corporate America, and your situation with the Whitmore Group has become a focal point of our investigation. Simone put the call on speaker, motioning for her team to listen. I'm not sure I understand, Ms. Walsh. We've been investigating allegations of discriminatory practices at several major corporations. The Whitmore Group has been on our radar for months. Your situation just happened to coincide with our broader investigation. We have interviews with 12 former employees, all people of color, all with similar stories of humiliation and marginalization. The room went completely still. Dr. Kim was frantically taking notes. Grace's expression had shifted from concern to something approaching satisfaction. What kind of stories? Simone asked carefully. A black marketing executive who was asked to tone down her presentation style because it made board members uncomfortable. A Latina engineer who was repeatedly asked if she was sure about her calculations. An Asian American financial analyst who was told he was too quiet to be leadership material, then criticized for being pushy when he became more assertive. Simone closed her eyes. She'd thought Helena's behavior was personal cruelty, but it was systemic toxicity with a personal face. Ms. Walsh, I appreciate your interest, but there's more. We have documentation of a company-wide diversity training session where Helena Whitmore complained about quota hiring and suggested that diversity initiatives were lowering company standards. This was recorded by multiple attendees. The implications hit like a thunderclap. Helena wasn't just a privileged woman with poor impulse control, she was the architect of a culture that systematically excluded and diminished people of color. What do you need from me? Simone asked. Just your story. On the record. We're not interested in he said she said drama. We're documenting patterns of institutional discrimination, and your experience, combined with your platform and credibility, could help other people find the courage to speak up. After Jennifer Walsh hung up, the conference room remained silent for several minutes. Finally, Grace spoke. This changes everything. Helena isn't going to be able to paint herself as a victim when 12 other people have similar stories. More than that, Dr. Kim added, it validates every decision you've made. Walking away from Whitmore wasn't emotional, it was smart business. You avoided being complicit in a discriminatory culture. But Simone felt something more complex than vindication. She thought about all the talented people of color who'd suffered in silence at Whitmore, who'd endured daily microaggressions without her resources or platform to fight back. We're doing the interview, she announced. Not for revenge but for accountability. And not just mine, all of us who are willing to share our experiences. Over the next week, the 60-minute story took shape. Malik agreed to discuss the subtle ways his expertise had been questioned throughout the Whitmore negotiations. Rebecca shared examples of how Helena's comments about certain types of lawyers had created a hostile environment for their legal discussions. Even Grace, after careful consideration, decided to speak about the broader patterns she'd observed in 35 years of corporate consulting. The story was scheduled to air in 2 weeks, but word leaked early. Helena's preemptive media campaign suddenly looked very different when positioned against a comprehensive investigation into institutional discrimination. David Whitmore's office called Simone directly. Miss Carter, I think there's been a misunderstanding. The 60 Minutes piece is going to be very damaging to my company, and frankly I think it's unfair to Helena. She made one mistake. Mr. Whitmore, Simone interrupted, with respect, your sister didn't make one mistake. According to 60 Minutes investigation, she's made dozens of mistakes with dozens of people over several years. The wine incident was just the only one that happened in public. Surely we can resolve this privately. I'm prepared to make a significant settlement offer. There's nothing to settle. I didn't sue your company. I simply chose not to work with it. That's not a legal problem, Mr. Whitmore. That's a business consequence. Please, Miss Carter. Helena's career will be ruined. Her reputation was ruined by her own actions. I'm not responsible for the consequences of her choices. As she hung up, Simone realized that David had never once apologized for the discrimination itself, only for the consequences of being caught. That was the difference between accountability and damage control. The 60-minute story was still 10 days away, but the real story was already being written in the contracts Carter Tech was signing, the partnerships they were forming, and the precedent they were setting for principled business leadership. Helena Whitmore had thought she was putting Simone in her place. Instead, she'd helped her find exactly where she belonged, at the forefront of a conversation about dignity, respect, and the true cost of toxic corporate culture. The 60 Minutes episode aired on a Sunday night in November, drawing 12.3 million viewers, the largest audience for the program in 3 years. Simone watched from her apartment with Grace, Malik, and Rebecca, a bottle of champagne unopened on her coffee table as they witnessed their story become part of something much larger. Jennifer Walsh's investigation was devastating in its thoroughness. Helena Whitmore wasn't just a woman who'd had too much wine at a charity gala. She was the documented architect of a discriminatory culture that had driven away dozens of talented employees over 5 years. The piece opened with Simone's story, the wine incident serving as a visceral introduction to the broader patterns of behavior. But the real power came in the testimonies that followed. Marcus Thompson, a black software engineer who'd been repeatedly passed over for promotions despite glowing performance reviews. Lisa Rodriguez, a Latina marketing director who'd been told her ideas were too aggressive for their client base. David Chin, an Asian American finance manager who'd been stereotyped as naturally good with numbers, while being excluded from strategic decision-making. Each story built on the others, creating an undeniable pattern of systemic discrimination disguised as corporate culture. But the moment that changed everything came 23 minutes into the segment, when Jennifer Walsh revealed the existence of internal Whitmore Group emails obtained through a former executive's cooperation. Helena's voice filled Simone's living room, reading her own words from a recorded diversity training session. I'm tired of pretending that hiring based on race and gender instead of merit is somehow progressive. We're lowering our standards to meet quotas, and it's affecting the quality of our work. The room went silent except for Helena's recorded voice continuing, some people just aren't cut out for high-level corporate environments. It's not personal, it's cultural fit. Grace reached for Simone's hand as they watched Helena's carefully constructed public image crumble in real time. This wasn't about spilled wine or misunderstandings or innocent mistakes. This was about deliberate, documented discrimination defended as business philosophy. The 60 Minutes piece concluded with Helena's on-camera response, recorded just days before the broadcast. She appeared composed but defensive, insisting that her comments had been taken out of context, that she was actually a champion of diversity and inclusion. "I made one mistake at a charity gala," Helena said directly to the camera. "Simone Carter has turned that into a witch hunt that's destroying my reputation and my career. Where's the accountability for her destructive behavior?" But the damage was already done. By Monday morning, #Whitmore Files was trending as other employees, current and former, began sharing their own experiences. The company's stock price dropped 23% in pre-market trading. 3 major clients announced they were reviewing their partnerships. The Whitmore Foundation's board called an emergency meeting. Simone's phone rang constantly with interview requests, partnership proposals, and speaking opportunities. But the call that mattered most came Tuesday afternoon from an unexpected source. "Miss Carter, this is David Chen from the 60 Minutes story. I hope you don't mind me calling. I got your number from Jennifer Walsh." David's voice carried a mix of relief and determination that Simone recognized from her own journey over the past month. "Of course, David. How are you holding up?" "Better than I expected, actually. Scared but better. I wanted to thank you for going first. For showing the rest of us that we didn't have to accept what was happening to us." "You didn't need me to show you that," Simone replied gently. "You needed to see that you weren't alone." "That's exactly right. And now? Well, 3 of us from the story are talking about starting our own consulting firm. Using our combined expertise in finance, marketing, and technology to serve companies that actually value diversity." Simone felt something shift inside her chest, an expansion of possibility she hadn't anticipated. "David, I'd love to hear more about that. Carter Tech is always looking for strategic partners who share our values." The conversation continued for another hour, exploring possibilities for collaboration, mentorship, and mutual support. By the time they hung up, Simone realized that Helena's whine hadn't just ended one partnership. It had catalyzed the creation of an entire network of purpose-driven professionals who refused to accept discrimination as the cost of career advancement. Wednesday brought news that the Whitmore Foundation had asked Helena to resign from her position. Thursday, David Whitmore announced that the company was implementing a comprehensive review of their hiring, promotion, and workplace culture practices under the guidance of external consultants. Friday afternoon, as Simone prepared to leave for a weekend planning retreat with the Patterson Group, her assistant buzzed her office. "Miss Carter, there's a Helena Whitmore here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's urgent." Simone sat back in her chair, considering. Grace had warned her about this moment, the inevitable attempt at private reconciliation, the plea for forgiveness designed to rehabilitate Helena's reputation rather than address the harm she'd caused. "Send her in," Simone said finally. "But ask Malik to join us." Helena Whitmore looked smaller than Simone remembered, her usual polished confidence replaced by something approaching desperation. She wore a simple black suit instead of her typical designer clothing, and her makeup couldn't quite hide the exhaustion around her eyes. "Thank you for seeing me," Helena began, settling into the chair across from Simone's desk. "I know you have every reason to refuse." "I'm curious about what you want to say," Simone replied neutrally. Helena took a shaky breath. "I want to apologize. Really apologize, not the corporate non-apology I gave after the gala. I was wrong. My behavior was inexcusable, and the consequences for other employees, consequences I never considered, are my responsibility." Malik entered quietly, taking a seat near the door. Helena glanced at him nervously before continuing. "I've lost my job, my foundation position, most of my friends. My reputation is destroyed, and honestly, I deserve all of that. But what I can't stand is knowing that my actions created an environment where talented people like Marcus and Lisa and David felt unwelcome and undervalued." Simone studied Helena's face, looking for signs of performance or manipulation. What she saw instead was something she hadn't expected. Genuine remorse mixed with the kind of forced self-reflection that only comes from public humiliation. "Helena, what do you want from me?" "Nothing," Helena said quickly. "I know I can't undo what I did. I can't give you back the months you spent trying to make our partnership work despite my behavior. I can't give Marcus or Lisa or David back the career opportunities they lost because of my prejudices." She paused, seeming to gather courage for what came next. "But I want you to know that watching your success over the past month, seeing how you turned my worst moment into your best opportunity, has taught me something I should have learned years ago. Excellence doesn't come from exclusion. It comes from creating environments where everyone can do their best work." Simone felt a complex mixture of emotions. Anger at the years of harm Helena had caused. satisfaction at seeing accountability take hold, and something approaching respect for the courage it took to sit in this chair and accept responsibility without making excuses. Helena, I appreciate you coming here. I appreciate the apology. But the people who most need to hear this from you are Marcus, Lisa, David, and all the others whose careers you affected. I know. I've already reached out to several of them. Some are willing to talk, others aren't, and I understand both responses. Helena stood to leave, then paused. There's one more thing. I've been asked to consult on diversity and inclusion training for companies that are serious about cultural change. Using my experience as a cautionary tale, helping other leaders recognize and address their own biases before they cause the kind of damage I caused. And I wanted you to know because some of those companies might be your partners or competitors. I didn't want you to be blindsided by my involvement. After Helena left, Malik whistled softly. That was not what I expected. People can surprise you, Simone replied, though she wasn't sure if she meant Helena's capacity for growth or her own willingness to see it. As she packed her briefcase for the weekend retreat, Simone reflected on the strange journey that had brought her to this moment. A spilled glass of wine had ended one chapter of her career and opened another that was more aligned with her values and more impactful than she'd ever imagined. But perhaps the most surprising revelation was that even the people who harm us can sometimes find their way to accountability, and that witnessing that transformation could be almost as powerful as achieving our own success. 6 months after the 60 Minutes story aired, Simone stood in the ballroom of the Marriott Marquis in Atlanta, looking out at 300 faces that represented something unprecedented in corporate America. The first annual Dignity and Excellence Conference had sold out within 48 hours of announcement, drawing executives, entrepreneurs, and advocates from every major industry. The keynote lineup read like a who's who of business leaders who'd faced discrimination and transformed it into positive change. Marcus Thompson had launched his software development company and was already competing for major contracts. Lisa Rodriguez had started a marketing firm specializing in authentic diversity messaging. David Chen's consulting group had grown to 12 employees and was advising Fortune 500 companies on inclusive financial practices. But the real breakthrough had come from an unexpected source, Helena Whitmore. Ladies and gentlemen, Simone said into the microphone, I want to introduce someone who exemplifies the difficult but necessary work of personal accountability and systemic change. Her journey from causing harm to preventing it offers hope that even the most entrenched patterns of discrimination can be interrupted and redirected. Helena took the stage to polite but cautious applause. Over the past 6 months, her transformation had been documented through a series of brutally honest interviews and a memoir that donated all proceeds to organizations supporting professionals of color in corporate environments. 2 years ago, Helena began, I believed that discrimination was something obvious and intentional, cross-burnings and racial slurs and explicit exclusion. I never recognized that I was actively participating in a subtler but equally damaging form of prejudice every day. Her presentation was methodical and unflinching, walking through specific examples of her past behavior and the psychological and professional harm it had caused. She didn't ask for forgiveness or sympathy, she simply laid out a roadmap for recognizing and interrupting discriminatory patterns before they became discriminatory cultures. The wine I poured on Simone Carter was just the visible moment when my internal biases became external actions. But those biases had been shaping my decisions, my hiring recommendations, my performance evaluations, and my daily interactions for years. Simone's response forced me to confront not just that moment, but the pattern it represented. During the Q&A session, a young black woman in the audience asked the question Simone had been waiting for. Ms. Whitmore, how do we know this isn't just reputation management? How do we know you've actually changed and aren't just performing accountability to rebuild your career? Helena was quiet for a long moment. You don't know that, she said finally. And you shouldn't take my word for it. The proof isn't in what I say, it's in the results of the organizations I work with. Are they retaining more employees of color? Are they promoting more diverse candidates to leadership positions? Are they creating cultures where people like Marcus and Lisa and David want to stay and grow? She gestured toward the screen behind her, which showed data from her consulting work over the past year. These are the metrics that matter. Not my intentions but my impact. Not my journey, but the destinations of the people I'm trying to help. After Helena's presentation, Simone found herself in conversation with Amanda Patterson and several other business leaders who'd been following the developments since the original incident. This is remarkable, said Janet Morrison, CEO of a major healthcare company. A year ago, diversity and inclusion felt like checkbox exercises and required training sessions. Now we're talking about fundamental cultural transformation. That's because we're finally addressing the real issue, Amanda replied. It was never about diversity for diversity's sake. It was about creating environments where excellence can emerge from everyone, not just people who look and think like the traditional leadership. Dr. James Washington, president of a historically black university, joined their conversation. What excites me most is seeing this move beyond corporate environments. We're getting inquiries from students who want to learn not just how to succeed in traditional business structures, but how to create alternatives that center equity and dignity from the beginning. This was exactly what Simone had hoped for, the ripple effects expanding beyond their original circle to influence how the next generation approached professional relationships and business culture. During the conference's final session, she announced Carter Tech's newest initiative, the Dignity and Excellence Fellowship, a 2-year program that would provide funding, mentorship, and resources for entrepreneurs from underrepresented backgrounds who were building businesses with equity and inclusion as core values rather than afterthoughts. We received over 800 applications for our first cohort of 20 fellows, she announced. These aren't just businesses, they're proof that discrimination isn't just morally wrong, it's economically inefficient. When we exclude talented people, we exclude innovative solutions to complex problems. As the conference concluded, Simone reflected on how far they'd all traveled from that night at the Whitmore Foundation Gala. The wine stain had been cleaned from her jacket months ago, but its impact continued to expand in ways she couldn't have imagined. Malik found her in the quiet corridor outside the ballroom as attendees gradually dispersed. "Penny, for your thoughts," he said. "I'm thinking about my grandmother," Simone replied. "She used to say that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you is actually the best thing, but you can't see it until you're on the other side." The wine. Helena's cruelty. The humiliation. All of it led to this. She gestured toward the ballroom where conversations were still happening, connections being made, strategies being shared. If she hadn't poured that wine, we'd probably still be locked into that exclusive contract with Whitmore, making good money but not making real change. No Patterson Group Consortium. No community equity models. No dignity and excellence network. No proof that walking away from what looks like everything can actually be the first step toward having something better. As they walked toward the elevator, Grace appeared with a tablet full of follow-up requests and partnership proposals. "The ripples are still expanding," she announced. 3 cities want to adapt the Patterson model for their infrastructure projects. 5 Fortune 500 companies want consulting on inclusive leadership development. And Harvard Business School wants to create a case study program around the conference. But the message that mattered most had come earlier that day from an unknown sender. "Miss Carter, I'm a 23-year-old black woman starting my first job at a major consulting firm. Your story taught me that I don't have to accept disrespect as the price of opportunity. Thank you for showing me a different way forward. Ashley." That message, multiplied across hundreds of young professionals who were refusing to normalize discrimination, represented the true victory. Not just Simone's success, but the success of everyone who would never have to experience what she'd experienced because the conversation had fundamentally changed. Helena Whitmore had tried to put Simone in her place. Instead, she'd helped create a world where people like Simone could define their own place, and make room for others to do the same. 1 year after the wine incident, Simone Carter stood in the lobby of Carter Tech's new headquarters, a gleaming 30-story tower in downtown Atlanta that housed not only her company but also the offices of the Dignity and Excellence Foundation and 12 startups founded by fellowship recipients. The building itself was a testament to the principles they'd fought for. Every contractor had been required to meet diversity benchmarks, every design decision had included community input, and the ground floor featured a public innovation lab where local students could access technology resources and mentorship. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see the construction crews working on the Patterson Group's smart city infrastructure, the project that had emerged from their refusal to accept Helena's disrespect. Atlanta's mayor had called it the most inclusive urban development initiative in the country, with 40% of contracts going to minority-owned businesses and genuine community ownership stakes ensuring long-term local benefit. "The Times wants to do a 1-year retrospective," Malik announced, joining her by the windows with his usual morning coffee and tablet full of updates. "They're calling it, the wine that changed corporate America." Simone laughed. "That's a bit dramatic." "Is it though?" Grace approached with Rebecca and Dr. Kim, all of them carrying folders thick with partnership proposals and speaking requests. The discrimination complaint process has changed at 60% of Fortune 500 companies. Business schools are requiring courses on inclusive leadership. And 3 states have passed legislation requiring corporate diversity reporting. Dr. Kim pulled up data on her tablet. The hashtag more than spilled wine has been used in connection with 847 documented cases of workplace discrimination being reported and addressed instead of ignored. That's 847 people who found the courage to speak up because they saw what was possible when you refused to stay silent. The numbers were staggering, but the stories behind them were what mattered most. Marcus Thompson Software Company had just landed a contract with the Department of Education to develop learning platforms for underserved schools. Lisa Rodriguez was advising 3 major brands on authentic community engagement strategies. David Chen's consulting firm had helped prevent discriminatory practices at dozens of organizations by teaching leaders to recognize their biases before acting on them. And Helena Whitmore had become one of the most sought-after speakers on unconscious bias and corporate accountability, donating her fees to organizations supporting professionals of color while rebuilding her life around the principle of repair rather than reputation. "There's something else," Rebecca said carefully. "David Whitmore has requested a meeting. Not about business, about accountability." Simone raised an eyebrow. David had largely disappeared from public view after the 60 Minutes piece aired, focusing on internal company reform while avoiding media attention. What kind of accountability? He wants to discuss reparations. Not legal settlements, but genuine repair for the harm his company's culture caused to employees over the years. He's proposing to fund educational opportunities, business development grants, and mental health resources for everyone who was affected. The idea of David Whitmore, the man who'd stood silent while his sister humiliated her, taking genuine responsibility, was almost as surprising as Helena's transformation had been. "Schedule the meeting," Simone decided. "But here in our space with our terms." 2 days later, David Whitmore sat in Carter Tech's main conference room, looking decidedly uncomfortable in the bright, open environment that was so different from his traditional corporate aesthetic. He was accompanied by a single attorney and a thick folder of documentation. "Miss Carter," he began, "I owe you an apology that's a year overdue. Not for Helena's behavior, she's accountable for her own actions, but for mine. For standing silent when I should have intervened. For enabling a culture that I knew was harmful but chose to ignore because it was profitable." Simone studied his face, looking for the same signs of performance she'd watched for with Helena. Instead, she saw something rarer, a powerful man genuinely grappling with his complicity in systemic harm. "What's your proposal, David?" He opened the folder and spread documents across the table. "We've identified 127 current and former employees who experienced discrimination at Whitmore Group. We're prepared to fund full MBA scholarships for anyone who wants them, provide low-interest business development loans for aspiring entrepreneurs, and cover mental health treatment for anyone who needs support processing workplace trauma." The scope was breathtaking. Not just financial compensation but investment in futures that had been damaged by discriminatory treatment. "Additionally," David continued, "we're establishing the Workplace Dignity Institute, with an annual budget of $50 million to research, document, and prevent employment discrimination across industries. Helena will serve as Director of Accountability Programs, but the board will be comprised entirely of people who've experienced workplace discrimination." "Why now?" Simone asked. "Why not a year ago or 5 years ago when the discrimination was actually happening?" David was quiet for a long moment. "Because a year ago I thought the problem was individual bad actors who needed better training. Seeing the systemic impact through the stories that emerged after 60 Minutes, understanding that our company culture had actively harmed dozens of talented people, that changed my perspective on what accountability actually requires." He gestured toward the city beyond the conference room windows. "You built all of this by walking away from our money and our validation. You proved that success doesn't require accepting disrespect, and that walking away from toxic environments isn't just personally liberating, it's economically smart. That's a lesson I needed to learn." The meeting continued for 3 hours, working through details of implementation and oversight. By the end, they had the framework for what would become one of the most comprehensive corporate reparations programs in American business history. As David prepared to leave, he paused at the door. "Miss Carter, I have one more question. Helena's wine damaged your jacket, but it created something much larger than either of you anticipated. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if she hadn't done it?" Simone considered the question seriously. "I think about that sometimes. Would we still be locked into exclusive contracts that limited our growth? Would Marcus and Lisa and David still be struggling in toxic environments? Would any of us have found the courage to demand better if we hadn't seen that it was possible?" And I think Helena's wine was just the catalyst. The real change came from people deciding they deserved dignity at work, not just paychecks. That realization was waiting to happen. It just needed the right spark. After David left, Simone stood alone in the conference room, looking out at the city where 3 major infrastructure projects were being built using the community equity model they'd pioneered. Where dozens of minority-owned businesses were thriving because they'd refused to accept that success required compromising their values. Her phone buzzed with a text from her grandmother. "Saw you on the news again, baby girl. Your grandfather would be so proud. You didn't just break the glass ceiling, you built a better building." As evening settled over Atlanta, Simone walked through the innovation lab where 30 local teenagers were learning coding, business development, and leadership skills. These young people would enter the workforce in a world where Helena's wine had helped establish new standards for dignity and respect. The wine stain was long gone, but its impact would last for generations. 5 years after Helena Whitmore poured wine on her jacket, Simone Carter stood at the podium of the World Economic Forum in Davos, addressing an audience of global business leaders about the transformation of corporate culture in America. The statistics she shared were remarkable. Workplace discrimination complaints had decreased by 34% across industries that had implemented dignity and excellence protocols. Employee retention among underrepresented groups had increased by 58% at companies that adopted community equity models. And most significantly, businesses led by diverse leadership teams were outperforming traditional corporate structures by an average of 23% in revenue growth and 41% in innovation metrics. 5 years ago, she told the audience, I thought success meant being accepted into spaces that were never designed for people like me. Today, I understand that real success means creating spaces where everyone can thrive, not despite their differences but because of them. In the audience sat many familiar faces. Amanda Patterson, whose company had expanded internationally using inclusive development models. Marcus Thompson, whose educational technology was being used in 47 countries. Lisa Rodriguez, who'd just been named to Forbes' list of most powerful women in marketing. And in the back row, taking notes with the focused attention of someone genuinely committed to learning, sat Helena Whitmore. Her transformation from perpetrator to advocate had been documented in academic studies, business school case studies, and her own forthcoming book about the psychology of prejudice and the possibility of redemption. After Simone's presentation during the networking reception, Helena approached her privately. I wanted you to know, Helena said quietly, that the Workplace Dignity Institute just funded its 500th scholarship and its 200th business development loan. The ripple effects of that night continue to expand in ways I never could have imagined. Are you proud of that work? Simone asked. Helena considered the question seriously. I'm grateful for the opportunity to repair harm I caused. I'm humbled by the trust that people have placed in me to help prevent others from experiencing what they experienced. But proud. She shook her head. Pride would suggest I chose to do the right thing. Really, I was forced to confront my behavior by the consequences of my actions and the courage of people like you who refused to accept it. It was a distinction that reflected the depth of Helena's personal work over the past 5 years. Understanding that accountability wasn't a destination but an ongoing practice. There's something I want to ask you, Helena continued. The Institute is launching a new program for young professionals, teaching them to recognize and interrupt discriminatory patterns before they become embedded in corporate cultures. Would you consider serving on our advisory board? The request represented something Simone couldn't have imagined 5 years ago. Helena Whitmore asking for her guidance in preventing the kind of harm Helena had once caused. Send me the details, Simone said. If the program is genuinely focused on prevention rather than reputation rehabilitation, I'm interested. Later that evening, at a private dinner for conference speakers, Simone found herself in conversation with Dr. Angela Davis, a legendary civil rights activist who'd been invited to speak about the intersection of social justice and economic development. I've been following your story, Dr. Davis said. What interests me most is how you transformed a moment of individual humiliation into systemic change. That's the essence of movement building, understanding that personal experiences are political opportunities. I'm not sure I understood that at the time, Simone admitted. I was just trying to preserve my dignity. Exactly. And in preserving your dignity, you created space for others to preserve theirs. That's how change happens. One person refusing to accept the unacceptable, then showing others that refusal is possible. The conversation continued late into the night, exploring connections between Simone's business success and broader movements for economic justice. By the time they parted ways, Simone had committed to partnering with Dr. Davis on a new initiative, the Economic Dignity Project, which would scale the community equity model globally while documenting its impact on local economies and social cohesion. 6 months later, Simone stood in the East Room of the White House, receiving the Presidential Medal of Freedom for her contributions to inclusive economic development. The citation read, "Simone Carter transformed a moment of personal adversity into a movement for professional dignity, creating opportunities for millions while proving that businesses built on equity and respect aren't just morally superior, they're economically superior." In her acceptance speech, she spoke about her grandmother, who'd cleaned office buildings and dreamed of a world where her granddaughter might one day own them. About Grace Thompson, who'd shown her that mentorship was about opening doors, not just walking through them. About Malik Jenkins and Rebecca Chen and Thomas Reed and all the people who'd believed in her vision even when she doubted it herself. But she saved her final words for an unexpected subject. "I want to acknowledge Helena Whitmore, who inadvertently became the catalyst for everything we've accomplished. Her action 5 years ago was wrong, harmful, and inexcusable. But her response to the consequences, her willingness to engage in genuine accountability and transformation, has created almost as much positive change as her original harm created damage." This award recognizes the work that emerged from that night, but it also represents hope that people can grow, that systems can change, and that dignity isn't something we have to earn, it's something we all deserve. After the ceremony, as Simone stood on the South Lawn with the medal in her hands, she thought about that young woman who'd walked out of the Whitmore Foundation Gala with wine staining her jacket and tears threatening to spill from her eyes. That woman had thought her career might be ending. She'd had no idea she was about to begin the most important work of her life. 5 years later, the wine was gone, but the woman remained, stronger, clearer, and surrounded by a community of people who'd learned that walking away from disrespect wasn't career suicide. It was career evolution. The stain had been cleaned, but the change it catalyzed would last forever.